We'll get organized here. I think we have a quorum. Our first order of business is the meeting minutes from January 30th, February 1st, February 6th, February 8th, and February 13th. Are there any additions or corrections? Is there a motion to approve? Motion from Blacks, second. From Howerton. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. At this time, I'll open a hearing on House Bill 2695 and ask Chris to explain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. House Bill 2695 allows a majority of eligible voters in a groundwater management district or an area for a proposed extension or reduction of a district to petition the chief engineer to extend or reduce territory in a groundwater management district. The bill amends KSA 82A-1033. It's a statute that allows the GMD board to petition the chief engineer to extend or reduce the territory of a district. The statute requires that such petition to the chief engineer includes a description of the territory to be annexed or removed, a map attached showing the district and the proposed area to be annexed or removed, and the board must have adopted a resolution approving such extension or reduction. What the bill will do is change that procedure to additionally allow a majority of eligible voters in the district or a majority of eligible voters in a proposed area for extension or reduction to make that same petition to extend or reduce the territory. The bill further specifies that the requirement for a GMD board to adopt a resolution recommending the extension or reduction shall not apply to petitions filed by a majority of eligible voters of a district or proposed area for extension or reduction. The bill would become effective upon publication in the statute book, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Any questions? Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering how we define the term eligible voters in this bill. Are we talking about landowners who are eligible to vote for the GMD board, or just any eligible voter for any election?
So that's a defined term in the GMD Act. It means anyone 18 years or older, public or private corporation or municipality, or any other legal or commercial entity that's a landowner comprising 40 or more contiguous acres, located within the boundaries of a district and not within the corporate limits of any municipality, or anyone who withdraws or uses groundwater from within the boundaries of the district in amount of 1 acre foot or more per year. So it's a defined term in the Act.
Representative Smith. Okay, Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chris. I just wanted to clarify that this doesn't change the procedure outlined in the rest of that portion of the statute where these petitions could be made, but then the chief engineer still has to verify that they meet the requirements of that statute and then would also have to hold a public hearing in order to determine whether or not that district could be extended or reduced.
That's correct. Once the petition's filed, a hearing is scheduled. There's notice requirements, notice starting at least 28 days before. And then the hearing the chief engineer does is similar to the fact finding in the organization of a district.
Thank you. Thanks.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Chris. We'll move to oral proponents, and first up is Frank Mercurio with the Syracuse Dairy as professional engineer, and his testimony is on WebEx. Morning, Frank.
Good morning. How is my volume?
You're good, Frank.
Okay, I'll proceed. Well, good morning and thank you. Syracuse Dairy LLC thanks Chairman Minix and the House Water Committee for this opportunity to testify as a proponent of House Bill 2695. Syracuse Dairy operates 6 dairies and a beef cattle feeding operation at 6 locations in southwest Kansas. We also have an extensive irrigated and dryland farming operation that produces feed for our cattle. We are landowners and water right holders in Hamilton, Stanton, Morton, Bernie, and Grant counties. We employ approximately 350 people and are currently milking about 33,000 cows every day, twice a day. The majority of our milk is delivered to the Dairy Farmers of America plant in Garden City. Our milk production, along with that of other dairies in southwest Kansas, supports a significant number of jobs in Garden City. My name is Frank Mercurio. I am an employee of Syracuse Dairy LLC. I'm a professional engineer licensed in Kansas, Colorado, and Oklahoma. One of my responsibilities is to provide technical support to Syracuse Dairy concerning issues related to water resources, water rights, and associated regulatory issues. Today, I'm representing Syracuse Dairy as a proponent of House Bill number 2695. We have a substantial interest in water policy and management. Our dry southwest Kansas climate provides an incentive to irrigate our farmland in order to provide sufficient feed for our cattle. We also require an ample supply of water for our dairy cows, dairy heifers, and beef cattle. We understand the need to balance wise water policy and water conservation versus the need to use these water resources to support agricultural production in our local economy. As the Ogallala Aquifer has declined, Syracuse Dairy has been forced to deal with the consequences of reduced availability of water. We established a water conservation area at our Westside Dairy in Stanton County and have documented significant water savings from the management flexibilities provided through that plan. We also established a water technology forum in 2020 at that same dairy and have implemented technological upgrades that significantly reduced water use at the dairy. Our partners in these endeavors were the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Water Resources and the Kansas Water Works. These agencies provided technical, administrative, and financial assistance that allowed us to make great strides in water conservation and management. Staff from these agencies and other partners worked directly with us and gave us the tools to install equipment and technology that result in measurable water conservation. Please note that our Kansas land and water rights are located within the boundaries of Southwest Kansas Groundwater Management District Number 3, or GMD3. We have received no discernible support from GMD3 in our water conservation efforts, and in fact received some pushback when we sought to renew our Westside Dairy Water Conservation. It is a matter of record that the owners of Syracuse Dairy were among those who signed and presented a petition to GMD3 to remove the portion of Hamilton County lying within GMD. This petition was delivered to GMD3 in March of 2023. It is my understanding that GMD3 has not affirmatively acted on this petition. It appears that GMD3 has decided that petitioners must further justify removal and have apparently refused to take any action that will allow the chief engineer to consider the Hamilton County petition. We are stonewalled at this point. The petition to remove Hamilton County from GMD3 reflected our frustration over several issues. These may be briefly summarized as implementation of a process to evaluate applications to redrill wells that conflicts with the long-established regulatory and technical procedures of the Division of Water Resources. In some cases, GMD3 asked applicants to reduce their water rights in order to get a favorable recommendation. Another point, being resistant to water conservation area plans that offered flexibilities that are unavailable to those who do not implement these plans. Being less than accommodating to the needs of the livestock industry when it comes to providing flexibilities that will provide a secure water supply. Returning little of the revenues raised from a substantial tax base in the form of funding that is readily accessible to the constituents of GMD3 to implement water conservation practices. Providing no discernible benefits to dryland producers who are subject to acreage-based taxation within GMD3, and providing services that are generally duplicates of those offered by state agencies. We're willing to provide more specific examples of these issues by providing copies of minutes from GMD3 meetings, copies of change application files retained by the Division of Water Resources, and copies of pertinent correspondence. In contrast, we can look north to GMD1 and GMD4. These districts have been very supportive of water conservation areas, have implemented local enhanced management areas or LEMAs, and operate readily accessible cost share programs to improve water use efficiency and implement other water conservation practices. Syracuse Dairy supports local self-rule and local solutions to local problems. We are not against the concept of groundwater management districts. However, when this unit of government fails to effectively serve its citizens and constituents, there must be a practical, legal avenue to rectify the situation. The current groundwater management district statute does not offer that avenue. House Bill number 2695 provides a significant step in correcting this situation. Syracuse Dairy LLC respectfully requests that the House Water Committee advance this bill for consideration by the Kansas House of Representatives. This concludes our testimony, and again, we thank you for this opportunity.
Frank, we're going to ask for questions. Any questions from the committee? Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Frank, so much for being with us today and for sharing your experience in Hamilton County. I was wondering if you could share, I wasn't finding your testimony, the number of petitioners that have signed on to the petition in Hamilton County?
I don't have the exact number, but it's my understanding that it's approximately 25 to 30 people. And the thing to understand is only a portion of Hamilton County is included in GMD3. And when you look at the eligibility of voters, it's a very small number in that portion of the county.
Thank
so
you.
What I'm trying to say is that's what seems like a small number represents the vast majority of water users within that area.
That's helpful context. Thank you. And then you mentioned this a little bit in your testimony. Could you, if you feel able to expand on it, could you talk a little bit more over what the process has been like the past year with initially introducing the petition and then trying to get this heard and moved forward by the GMD board?
There was a public meeting in February of 2023 where folks from Hamilton County gathered. We presented the basis for the petition, a lot of comment and discussion. Groundwater Management District 3 held that meeting. We then formalized the petition, submitted it in written form with signatures. GMD then apparently retained legal counsel to consider the matter, and we heard very little about it until late in 2023, where it's my understanding that they basically said you need to provide more information and basically dump the decision back to our labs to Justin.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Frank. So is it your understanding that there are no planned next steps for the petition? Is it just kind of sitting on the shelf? Have you heard anything more about next steps?
It's my understanding that the next steps is that we would have to do rather extensive amount of work to add additional justification beyond what we presented in our petition.
Thank you. Thanks, Frank.
Who else? Representative Sywert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On those signers of the petition, were they just permit holders, or was that every resident in the county that it covered?
They were water right holders and also dry land operators who were within that part of the.
So it was limited to every resident of the county?
Excuse me?
Open to every resident of that district then, right?
Yes, but as far as having any standing, they would have to meet the requirements of the
So, I mean-
permits in GMD.
Okay.
Representative Getz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sir, in your second page of your testimony, it talks about that you've received little or no support from GMD3. And then I was interested to get a little bit more feedback on our water conservation efforts, and in fact received some pushback when we sought to renew our west side dairy water conservation area. Would you be able to get a little more specific on what that pushback entailed?
So one of the big incentives for establishing a water conservation area is to gain flexibilities in the way that you can use water in return for making a commitment to use less water. One of the flexibilities that we requested was to allow our 2 dairy wells to exceed authorized quantity if necessary in critical years, but over the term of the water conservation area plan to achieve significant reductions. And this flexibility is not available to those who do not enroll in the water conservation area. And there's members of the GMD board that did not like that, kind of challenged that and opposed it to some degree.
Were you able to establish your water conservation area again, or were you not able to establish that again?
It took attendance at several meetings. The Division of Water Resources on our behalf did some additional groundwater modeling to show that there'd be no significant effect to any neighbors. And we were finally able to get a generally favorable recommendation from GMD3. However, it should also be noted that their favorable recommendation is not an absolute requirement for the chief engineer to approve the water conservation area.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Vaughn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick follow-up on the former line of questioning. So in the GMD statute, I know that the GMD is supposed to make the recommendation within 30 days or may request a little bit of an extension. How long did it take them to get your WCA approved, if you remember?
I believe it was between 60 and 90 days till we got
Okay, so quite a bit longer. Thank you.
Any further questions? Representative Howerton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm hearing the frustration in your voice. Do you feel that your next step would have to involve legal counsel?
that would probably be advisable, but we'd have to gather our financial resources in order to do that.
Thank you. So you don't feel like you can converse with the board on your own? You would need outside assistance to probably come to some kind of agreement?
I guess from my standpoint, it seems like conversation on our petition has pretty much stopped till we, I guess, challenge it. And one method of challenge it would be legal. We really haven't explored that just because of the time and the expense involved.
Right. Thank you very much.
Any further questions? Seeing none, we will move along. I believe that's all the oral proponents. There is one written proponent from David Walker, a landowner within GMD3. We'll move along to the opponents, and we have several in person here today, and we'll call on Tim Bays with GMD2 for oral opposition.
Good morning, committee members and Chairman Minix. Appreciate the opportunity to appear in front of you again. We really need to quit meeting like this, I think. But in all seriousness, I appreciate the opportunity always to come up and speak to our representatives and talk about some of these important issues. GMD2, the Equal Basic Groundwater Management District, I'm representing today. I'm the manager. My name's Tim Bays. We are opposed to House Bill 2695 for a couple of reasons. The main reason it'd be is it just erodes the powers of the GMD and then limits our ability to properly manage the aquifer. I do want to talk a little bit about the bill. We think there's actually two changes in that, at least our understanding of it. In section 1A, I think that also changes the board's role. It appears to us, at least in our reading and those that have read it from my office and our legal counsel, that would change that from just the board having a petition to a petition submitted by the board for a majority of the eligible voters or the eligible voters in a particular area. So I think that's a change. I'd obviously be interested in hearing what the committee believes that language says. Of course, we're really talking about the second portion, which I think is more troubling, with the direct petition to the chief engineer if an area wanted to be excluded or added. I think we're focused on the reduction, but there's also an ability for, in this language, for a group of folks to ask to be added to a district directly to the chief engineer. And those are both, I think, problematic and troubling to GMD2 at least. Limited financial resources, obviously. If a group wanted to come in, we'd obviously need to evaluate if we could handle that with our current finances. Sometimes you don't get a lot of revenue from a new area coming in, so I think that's important, but we're really talking about reduction. I think the reduction, a group that wanted to just remove themselves from a district to be able to petition directly to the chief engineer is really just circumvents our role in managing the aquifer. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the things we do, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. I've been up here in front of the committee multiple times and talked about some of the things we do, but obviously one of our main functions is reviewing water permit applications, making recommendations to the chief engineer. I think it would be really problematic to have a group that was under a different set of rules and regulations, maybe in a county or a township. And actually, the way this reads, just one person, one water right owner could come to the chief engineer and say, I want out, and it'd have to go through this process. It just says majority, so one out of one entity could come and say, I want out. And I think that makes a big problem when we're talking about a shared aquifer and everybody's hydrologically connected, where one person, one group, one township, maybe even one county can request to be removed. Obviously, our rules and regulations are very similar to DWR's. You'll probably hear that from Lane when he gets some talks. Our rules and regs are very similar. Ours actually have to be equal or more stringent than DWR's, so I think that's an issue. And then I think the bigger issue is that if we have an IGUCA or a LEMA, we talk about that a lot, we can't allow just a group of folks to be excluded and not be under that control provision of that LEMA or an IGUCA. If you think about House Bill 2279 that was passed last year, GMDs are tasked with establishing priority areas, coming up with action plans. So it'd be difficult to sort of empower the GMDs. We need to do these things. I think we're doing that. We've already done it in GMD2, and then allow someone to say, you know what, I don't want to be subject to this 10% reduction or 20% reduction. I want out. I'm going to go ask the chief engineer to be excluded from the district. And if it goes through the hearing process, as you all have said, if it goes through the hearing process and they're excluded, then we've got some folks that are under their control provisions, some that aren't. And I think that's extremely problematic. And I want to talk just a little bit about water quality. I think you all know that we run a number of water quality programs, including abandoned well plugging, making sure that cathodic boreholes are constructed properly. So if we have a group of folks that are in the district and a group that are out, and the only thing that separates them is a county road or a township road. So we've got, over here we're telling someone to plug a well, we're telling someone you got to construct this cathodic borehole properly. On the other side of the road, they don't have to do it that way. I will share a little story, because I bring up cathodic boreholes quite a bit. We were really GMD2 and GMD5. I think maybe Orrin could collaborate that. We were really the first ones that required sort of these standards on how these had to be constructed. KCC later came on board. We've got similar rules and regs, but we definitely enforce ours a little bit different, make sure that the surface casing is set properly. And we used to catch a lot of grief for it. Out-of-state construction companies say, why do we got to put in all this surface casing? Why do we got to put in this certain wall thickness? Where KCC was not requiring this, and they still don't, as far as my knowledge. We have a different set of interpretation of our rules compared to theirs. Well, you may all remember the gas leak in Yagi in the Hutchinson, Willowbrook area years ago, blew up parts of Hutchinson. And some of those contractors actually called our office after that and said, you know, I'm sorry. I'm really glad you guys made us do that. And I think back now, if we hadn't required that, or in this case, maybe this group of folks were not in the district anymore, God knows what would have happened. I mean, we would have had probably massive groundwater contamination if we wouldn't have had that surface casing set properly. So I tell that long story just to say, if we're all in a shared aquifer, everybody's pumping out of the same aquifer, they really need to be under common management, under the common control and regulations. I think it's just a dangerous road to go down to. Someone gets irritated with the district, they don't like the rules and regs, they don't want to be in Alema, just to run to the chief engineer and say, hey, I want out. And I think that's just not the good way to do things. I think about my other hat when I'm not a groundwater management district manager, I'm also on the school board. We're going through a bond issue right now, and I'm pretty sure there's some folks, if it passes, don't want to be involved in that bond. You know, maybe even myself included, I got to pay a whole lot more taxes. I mean, obviously I'm for it. You know, you can't run to the county or the state board of education and say, I don't want to be under this. I don't want to be under this bond anymore. Let me out. I mean, it's just not the way it works. It's not the way it works with cities with annexation or de-annexation either. I think I'll probably close with that and stand for questions, but I appreciate the opportunity and encourage you not to pass House Bill 2695. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Any questions? Representative Titus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bays, thanks to that handy GIS presentation we had at the beginning of the year, I pulled up the GMD2 map with a list of wells, and there are a large number of wells literally just across the road around your district. So I assume a number of these are domestic wells, but it seems like the situation you described exists, and I didn't zoom out, but I assume it exists around every GMD in every management area. There are going to be wells just across the road because that's the nature of an aquifer. So I guess I don't understand your concern that mass chaos will ensue when the chief engineer lets every single one-person petition. That scenario doesn't seem very likely, as you've described, and much of what you are fearing exists currently.
I appreciate the comments. I don't think that exists right now. I think the wells, the large production wells in our area are in the Equus-Beds aquifer. Those that you're looking at on the outside may be domestic, they may be alluvial aquifer wells, but they're really, I mean, our boundaries are, you know, when we did expand our boundaries. Representative Titus, you probably remember it, because I think you might have been still at DWR at the time, or KDA, but you have to prove that you're in a hydrologically connected community or an aquifer. So when we did our expansion of our boundaries, we expanded actually 4 areas. That was part of the hearing and part of the proof. That's really where, as far as we could go, to say that we're still in that hydrologically connected community. So I think those wells that you're talking about, I don't think they're part of the Equus-Beds aquifer. They may be alluvial, or they may be. And yeah, I'm sure there's some right across the road, but I think those are small domestic type wells.
The other question I'd ask, and I'll ask this of all the GMDs, is if you want to preemptively address it, but Mr. Bays, when you were here on one of the previous bills, you made a point of quoting back the legislative declaration for groundwater management districts, that is the right of local water users to determine their destiny. Mm-hmm. And it seems like that only stretches so far as a GMD board determines their destiny. Just appreciate your thoughts on, there's a little bit of tension between those two positions.
Yeah, I agree. It is the board, but the board, you have to remember, is duly elected. They're not appointed. They are elected by eligible voters, and particularly in our district, they are by position, by geographic and by user group. So I think that guarantees a fair representation of those folks. And you know, maybe a little farther in the proceedings for an IGUCA, the GMD board can light that fire, strike that match, and light the IGUCA, or a subset of the eligible voters can do that. 300 or 5%, I think, is how that language reads. So there is an opportunity. If you think an area needs to be managed and the GMD board is not doing it, you can get enough folks, petition, and go directly to the chief engineer with that.
Anybody else? Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think about us, we're the House of Representatives, we represent. So how, when you hear the testimony of, they're not trying to overpump, they're not trying to overuse, they're trying to conserve, and there is conflict there. And the only recourse they feel is probably legal action because communication has stopped. How is that representative? How is the board representing their constituents in this GMD?
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable discussing GMD3 because I'm just not that knowledgeable. Are you talking about?
I'm basing on your experience as GMD2.
Yeah, certainly. Of course, we have
What
open.
lessons have you learned?
Yeah, well, yeah, a lot over my 30-some years, but obviously, we have open meetings, we have monthly meetings, people can come address the board. I get board members that call me frequently and say, hey, so-and-so called and has this concern. I mean, they do communicate directly with the board. I prefer they just call the staff because they think that puts the board at a little bit of an unusual circumstance, but sometimes, well, actually, quite frankly, I get calls from a board member that said, hey, do you know anything about this area in this township? And if I do, I'll tell them. If I don't, I'll go explore it. So I think there is lots of opportunities for people to come and talk to our board. Like I say, we have our monthly meetings that are open to the public. We have other public meetings. We have an annual meeting coming up that folks can come and express. And of course, the power is with the vote too. If they don't like the way the board's going, they can certainly vote new members in.
Do you feel that legal action is the best course and the only recourse for when communication stops?
No, I don't. No, I think the key is to not have the communication stop. I mean, that's really the issue. When the communication stops, I think we're all well aware of, I think Wichita and my office quit talking, and that was a really bad thing. And I think that's not pointing the finger at anybody. I think all parties were responsible for that. And, I don't want to spend a lot of time, but I really want to share, going back to Wichita, just why I have the opportunity. We did a whole bunch of good things back in the day, and there was not any conflicts. I mean, I remember their wellfield supervisor calling me years ago and say, hey, we got to change out half of our water meters. They don't meet the regs anymore. And DWR had told them that. And I was like, well, let's see if we can figure this out. We actually ran an independent meter test for them so they didn't have to do that. So this conflict that we were just always at each other's throats just is so incorrect. But you're right, the communication stopped, and I think we can blame lots of folks for that. And I think that's the problem, that communication stops.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bays. I know we've called you up here a few times in the past couple weeks, and I appreciate you continuing to share your perspective on these bills. I do have a bit of a conundrum that I just want to talk through that I think is, one of the essential reasons that I proposed this bill. And I'm very supportive of the concept of GMDs. I think that a lot of great work can be done when they act as a resource and bringing people together to work to conserve the resource and work with the landowners and bring them together to accomplish good things. But I think the conflict that I'm seeing is, GMDs have complete independent taxing authority. You compare it to a city, but it's not really the same thing. I mean, the budgetary process, the type of staff that are reviewing the budget, all those things are not exactly parallel. So it's this own entity that has complete discretion over the budget. And then you have these folks who are being taxed who don't feel like their district is benefiting from any of those funds or any of those taxes. And so they petition the board. But I'm wondering, what incentive would the board ever have to approve their petition or pass a resolution approving their petition if it means a loss of tax base for them? And I think that's the conflict it creates because, for example, in the case of Hamilton County, which I know you don't represent GMD3, but as a hypothetical, I'm worried that, is part of the reason that the GMD would be dragging their feet is because they don't want to lose that tax base. What incentive would they have to allow that petition to move forward as a hypothetical?
Really good question, because I've never had really anybody that wanted to be removed from my district. But yeah, I think there would be a financial impact. I can't believe that our board would say, well, one small group is going to have a big financial impact, where we'd say, oh, absolutely not. Now, if an entire county wanted out, that's a whole nother story. But I don't think I just don't think that finances end up being the answer. I mean, end up being the stick or the carrot that makes that board change their mind. I think if it's a hydraulically connected community, as the regs say or the statutes say, then everybody ought to be under the same common management. Now, if those folks don't feel like they're getting any worth at the district, then I think that needs to be addressed to the district, whether that's through voting, whether that's where they come to public meetings and say, hey, what are you doing for us? And I don't know that that's happened in GMD3. I think that's what needs to happen. I think it goes back to Representative Howerton. I mean, if there's not communication, that those folks don't feel like they're getting any worth, then that's really the problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I definitely, I think it's important to have those checks and balances and that accountability. And I think this is one way that that could potentially be achieved, but I understand that there are different ways of achieving that. And, we need to find the most effective path forward. But, I think having that accountability and that check and balance is important. And so I appreciate this discussion. Thank you.
I might add, if I could, Representative Minix, just the budget process. I think we touched on that, but we really didn't delve into it. The GMD Act requires that we present a budget actually at our annual meeting. It's actually sort of a strange, awkward situation where you're presenting a budget for, like our meeting is in March and we're presenting it for 2025. You have to present that to the entire audience, and they're actually the ones that say, yeah, go forward with this or not. So there is input, and then we're required by law to have a public budget hearing later on that year for that next year's budget. So there is opportunity for folks to have input in that budget. Do folks show up? Not very much. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, we maybe get a couple at our budget hearing, and I wish those folks would come and say, hey, what are you going to do for this area over here? And, can you put some money into that? I wish that would happen more.
Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I erroneously missed one neutral oral testimony here from Lane Letourneau. I apologize.
Well, good morning, and no need to apologize. I knew I'd get on up here sometime, so. Again, I'm Lane Letourneau. I'm the Water Appropriation Program Manager for Kansas Department of Agriculture's Division of Water Resources. And I want to provide neutral testimony because just depending on how this bill plays out, I wanted the committee and everybody to understand that whether you're inside a GMD or you're outside of a GMD, you still have the protections of your private property right. All of that is under the authority of the chief engineer. And so if someone would petition out of a GMD, they would fall under the rules of the state and the chief engineer's rules. And like Tim pointed out, if you're within the boundaries of a groundwater management district, then that district, they provide recommendations for rules to the chief engineer that we adopt. And as Tim pointed out, fundamentally, they're the same. Both sets of rules protect private property rights. The GMDs might have a little bit something different on safe yield or spacing, but again, both sets of rules protect private property rights. And then I wanted to state, GMDs do serve to organize local landowners, and they're represented by their boards. And so it does provide the opportunity for local input at the board level, because sometimes it is a little daunting to come directly to the state. We fully understand that. But then I also want to address a concern that we've heard in our Garden City field office and in headquarters about this situation in Hamilton County. Folks were told in Hamilton County, if you opt out of the GMD, then the state is going to come in and they're going to cut your water use. And that is not the case. That is not what we do. To reduce use, it takes due process. It requires public hearings. If we were just to come in and cut somebody, that's a takings. And so, like I said, there's due process. There's no plan right now to reduce use in Hamilton County if these folks are successful and they opt out of GMB3. Again, we'll continue to work with water users in every part of the state. We're committed to doing that. And so with that, Chairman, thank you, and I'll stand for questions.
Any questions? Representative Smith.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Letourneau. I read your testimony before you got up here, and the question I have for you, you touched on it, But to dig a little deeper, if a group were to want to secede from a GMD, are they required, in your opinion, to meet statutory requirements to become a GMD of their own?
No, I don't believe they would have to become.
So those 7 points underneath, I think it's 82A 1024, they wouldn't necessarily have to meet those 7 points in order to, that qualify them as a GMD. They wouldn't necessarily have to meet those 7 points in order to secede from a GMD.
I think you're correct.
All right, thank you for your opinion.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Lane. Okay, I'll get back in order now. And our next opponent oral is Katie Durham with GMD 1.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee, for another opportunity to be in front of you guys today. As always, we just really welcome the opportunity to discuss some of these really important topics and answer any questions that the committee may have. We are testifying in opposition to 2695 today. A couple points that I do want to touch on to give some background information to that. Obviously, when we're putting together these conservation programs like LEMAs or WCAs, they can be very cumbersome and lengthy processes. And sometimes that takes turning the needle and helping people to get educated and understand what the situation is that they're really facing. One example I would have is back in 2013 and 14, the original LEMA, district-wide LEMA for GMD1 was proposed and sent out to vote, and there was a region in particular that was really just not in favor, not so much even with the way with doing a LEMA per se, but how how it was formulated and how the values were actually come up with. And so, at the time, would have that community or that area, would they have then taken that forward and wanted to petition to actually leave because of the issue that they were facing with that current LEMA? That does become a concern. Now, with that being said, the enhanced outreach and education and working with people and facilitated dialogue, that same group of folks in that region are actually now big proponents of the current 4-county LEMA structure. And so a lot of that has to do with just sitting and listening and understanding what the concerns are. So that would be one, concern of making sure that, a disgruntlement versus, a genuine feeling of being underserved. With all that being said, I will emphasize on the fact that we are public servants. GMDs have the responsibility to serve the general public that they represent. And in doing so, if there is a group of people, eligible voters, or a community that does not feel that they're being served appropriately, there does need to be some sort of concrete methodology for how they can get answers to their questions and move things forward. And whether or not that's a formal process, with the GMD board, with oversight of the chief engineer, a year process to kind of really diligently work forward and try to find a solution to the problem before escalation, maybe it would look something like that or something of that nature. But those are just some basic thoughts that we kind of wanted to bring forward for your consideration and for discussion, and are happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Any questions? Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what kind of communication, what would you do in this situation? You've got a group of users that are obviously not feeling heard. They're not making any progress. Communication has stopped from the board. In your position, how would you go about reconciling that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, communication from the board is key, right? So I think the first thing would be working directly with the board member that is the representative for that community and trying to understand what some of the background is behind the worries and the complaints. And then meeting face to face with people and trying to, part of my job is being a facilitator, right? So sitting down, having those hard conversations and trying to find that middle ground, I do feel that that is our responsibility to provide a good opportunity to give those people ample situations where they can voice their opinions. Yeah.
Any further questions? Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, just a comment. I just want to say thank you very much for your willingness to have those hard conversations and to work with the producers of your district to be a resource for them. And, you know, even when you have parts of the district that are concerned with the management plan, working with them and bringing them around to a point of support, I think that really speaks volumes to your leadership. And I just want to say thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you very much.
Further questions? Seeing none, we'll move forward. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
Our next presenter opponent is Orrin Farrell from GMD 5. Welcome, Orrin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And in advance, I apologize for my voice waivers. I was yelling at wrestling matches all night last night, so we'll see how it goes. I'm a head coach, so thank you for the opportunity. GMD 5, we do stand opposed to this bill, primarily not to quash local voices. That's not our intent at all. We're just not sure there's a concern in our area, and so we're just trying to figure out what the issue is here that needs to be addressed in a statewide statute. We have several issues in our district that are difficult to go through. They're stressful, they are complex. As a natural progression from that, there's going to be disagreement. Some of our water users feel like, why am I being assessed such a high rate for something that's happening 40, 50, 60 miles away that I'm not even a part of? Valid concern. I get those calls routinely. So I intentionally, I'll go meet with the person, I'll talk to the person directly and say, what is your concern? And I lay out what the GMD is doing, what our purpose is, so that I make sure that I understand their point of view. I will then take that back to the board, say, make sure everybody's aware these are concerns with what we're doing or proposing to do, and have that dialogue. Like previous constituents said, this goes back to communication and having that candid, transparent communication. We really strive for that. I have had water users outside of the GMD, down to the south and to the southeast of my district, call me up and say, you know, what are you guys doing? We'd like to be a part of what you're doing because we see benefit. So I invested the time to take a look at, is that area hydrologically connected? Does it meet those statutory requirements that were brought up earlier? Frankly, they didn't meet those requirements. And so, you know, I went back and talked to him, said, yeah, I appreciate your concern. Maybe this is something you can talk to the chief engineer to form a WCA or something to address what you're wanting to do through some flexibilities. But unfortunately, you don't. Our opinion is we don't fit the requirements for an expansion of GMD. And really what they're trying to get into is the water bank. And they coincidentally have the same boundaries. But they really wanted to get some of those extra access to those extra programs. But they didn't meet the qualifications, and so we ended up not expanding into those regions. From our perspective, this really seems like a solution that is trying to find a problem. Especially when you look at it in my neck of the woods. There are disagreements routinely, but there are disagreements that's good concourse. That's good. That's how good sound water policy is founded, is by having that conversation, trying to work through that problem in open communication. I had an annual meeting just, I guess, 4 nights ago on Thursday. Pretty much a packed house because there's quite a bit going on. We presented our budget at the beginning of the meeting. This is how we spent our money in 2022, how we spent our money in 23, how we're authorized to use it in 2024. This is how we're contemplating using it in 2025. We laid out that foundation, and we intentionally stopped and paused and wanted actual feedback. We intentionally waited for folks to speak up with concerns, not a peep. I said, okay, are we okay with moving this forward so we can have this budget hearing in July? Yep. Move forward with what you're doing. You're doing a good job. Keep moving. Keep doing what you're doing. That was good concourse. Again, There's checks and balances with what we're doing. We don't operate in a vacuum. A lot of times it seems like we're completely autonomous and we just operate in our own little bubble, but that's not true. We have communications with our water users, conversations with our dry land water landowners as well. I have water users and landowners in my district that don't agree with what we're doing. I sit down with them all the time and say, okay, how can we best address your concern to make sure we're fitting your needs? And we work through that, lay out the science, lay out the reasoning behind the board decision, and 9 times out of 9, almost always, I cannot even think of a time they would say, no, I'm not satisfied, and they go away disgruntled. I answer questions. That's what we're there to do. Like Katie was mentioning, we facilitate those conversations. And they're not fun conversations, but that's the job. And so with that, we do stand opposed to the bill and would encourage the committee to highly consider even working this bill and moving this forward. We would stand opposed. I'll answer any questions. Thank you.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Farrell, I always appreciate your testimony. I think you're well-spoken. You obviously know what you're talking about, and I respect what you have to say on a lot of issues. One of the things, though, today that I'm going to take issue with is a solution in search of a problem. I think when you have 2 to 3 dozen folks who want to get out, that's not a problem you can overlook. And it makes me question how we got, if not the problems that they present to the GMD, then why? Why would they as a group want to remove themselves? So to me, the problem is that, and it's blaring. It's not in your district, so I'm sure that it is something you're not familiar with. I'm not sold on the idea that that's the answer, but what process of arbitration would you suggest to a large, I'm not talking about 1 to 4 folks who are unhappy with a Lima or an Iguca or whatever it is. I'm talking about a large contingent of your district saying, we don't want to be a part of this anymore. What arbitration process would you think is fair in that situation?
Great question, because we've not had to deal with that, fortunately. If I were put in that position, frankly, we'd have a very specific conversation in that location and hold it over multiple days so that if for some reason folks couldn't attend one meeting, they could attend another one, but have those conversations one-on-one. Look them in the eye. What is your concern? And just stay there and be, in both sides, be committed to staying in that meeting until there's some kind of a path forward. It may not be a good path that either one chooses to do or likes to do, but stay committed. When you walk in that door, we're going to face this, or we're going to deal with it on the front end. That's the way I would handle it, just because that's the way I'm built on logic and reason. We would be facing it head on.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Would you see the chief engineer as an arbitrator?
Potentially, yeah. I could see the chief engineer. I could see the water office facilitating as well, because they deal with a lot of water policy concerns statewide. So I could see either of those situations, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Shannon Kenyon with GMD4. Welcome, Shannon.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I'm Shannon Kenyon, manager for the Northwest Kansas Groundwater Management District Number 4 in Colby. As I have testified and presented to this committee several times, I'm not going to bore you again with the success of the local enhanced management areas, or LEMAs, that have shown to have a positive impact on the aquifer in Northwest Kansas. I stand here today in opposition to House Bill 2695 that proposes to erode the ability of a GMD to manage their groundwater resources by allowing stakeholders to petition the chief engineer instead of the GMD Board of Directors for inclusion or exclusion from the district. The purpose of the Groundwater Management District Act of 1972 was created for the very purpose of providing the local power to do so. I have outlined the ramifications of House Bill 2695 as it relates to GMD4, specifically citing the petitioners in the lawsuit Friesen versus Barfield that we were a party to in my written testimony, as well as provided a map on what that could look like if such a bill is passed. I want to say right now, pardon the map, we're in between using different platforms for making those maps, so I kind of had to do the whole cut and glue stick thing on it. So anyway, so that's usually looks a little more professional than that, but I threw my hands up. So anyway, what I would like to address to you today, though, is the elephant in the room. An elephant that has been in this room since this committee formed and even before that. If you haven't discerned by now, I am a very passionate person. I'm passionate to public service. I'm passionate to the people of Northwest Kansas. I'm passionate about extending the life of the aquifer, and most importantly, I'm passionate about advancement and protection of all those pieces working together so that Northwest Kansas can continue to thrive and enjoy our way of life for generations to come. Not just for the local region, but for the state, for the nation, and even globally with our exports. And I know you share that passion with me, or you wouldn't be in your position today. Going back to House Bill 2695, this bill is addressing a problem in Hamilton County, more specifically in GMD3, and the way the situation has been handled by them. In fact, many, not all, but many of the bills are because of the actions, or worse yet, inactions in GMD3 to address the seriousness of the aquifer declines that will ultimately affect all Kansans. I want to note that there are many great, wonderful, hardworking, water-saving pioneers in GMD3 and a few on the board of directors. My heart goes out to them as they are the true leaders, shadowed by those that belittle and antagonize their efforts. There are some associated with GMD3, once again, not all, that are destroying the hopes and dreams of those that want to be good stewards of the resource. Again, it's not all of them, but those that are not and call themselves leaders have the rest of us on their puppet strings, creating unwanted consequences. The same puppet strings that have me here today and many times before this, so that I am unavailable to serve my stakeholders as they have entrusted me to do. The same producers that have trusted me and the GMD4 Board of Directors to impose water use reductions through LEMAs based on public input, their input to extend the life of the Ogallala Aquifer in Northwest Kansas. With that said, sometimes feathers get ruffled, and sometimes ruffling feathers in the short term is better than not when looking at the long term. Sometimes feathers are ruffled to do what's right. This bill and several others that have been presented in this session and a few in the past are intended to address real problems. Problems that don't have an easy solution. Problems that I commend you all as our state representatives for identifying and working diligently to find solutions for, and I mean that with true sincerity. As GMD managers and volunteers on the board of directors, we have the moral responsibility to be leaders. Sadly, it is of my opinion that not all of us are. Part of being a leader is speaking the truth, and that is something sometimes difficult. But to be silent is to be complacent, and that is my message today. To wrap this up, I truly appreciate all of your efforts and the same passion you have as I do for the resource. I'm asking that House Bill 2695 not be passed, and that some problems be addressed locally and to those responsible for the problems. I understand this is not an easy task. I feel it is my duty as a leader for who I stand for here today to not be silent and to ask of you for your understanding. Thank you very much for hearing me out on this, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Any questions? Representative Howerton.
I want to thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you for that honest evaluation, because it's better to come from you than one of us. I think it has a lot more power. I'll save my remarks for some closing, but I just want to thank you for your bravery and your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Vaughn.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shannon, for your remarks. And, you know, I know with some of these bills, they have been drafted due to problems in specifically in GMD3, and that has, in that process, roped in many of you who are not experiencing these challenges in your districts. And, you know, despite that, I really appreciate you continuing to come here and to share your perspective and the perspectives of your landowners and how this would impact them, and for really naming the issue for what it is. And I think your courage in doing so will allow us to move forward and hopefully put pressure on the right folks, specifically in GMD3, to start moving in the right direction to address some of these challenges that do impact all Kansans, and that I really think is our concern as a committee to address. So thank you for your courage and for really calling out the issue for what it is, so that we can move forward in a much more precise and, I think, targeted way to address the issue at hand. So thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Shannon.
Thank you.
I'll direct the committee's attention to 2 written opponent testimonies from Mark Rood of GMD3 and Ken Askren of the Kansas Farm Bureau. I believe we've covered all the testimony. I will close the hearing on House Bill 2695. I know we have a couple committee members that really need to get to another committee. Do you intend to push this farther? Comment. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the committee and for all those who testified today in regards to this bill. You know, it doesn't seem like there's a general consensus around how to move this forward, so I don't feel that we need to move this particular bill forward today, but I am really intrigued by some of the comments of the conferees in regards to what is it, and also the representative to my right, who I think made some really excellent comments about what does it look like to have a real arbitration process, or what does it look like to have a facilitated conversation when no conversation is being had. So I want to continue that conversation in particular, and would be interested in having that conversation as a committee as well. But I don't want to leave this where it's at. I think this issue, along with some of the other issues that we talked about in the last couple of weeks, are important to address. And if these bills aren't the right way to address them, I want to continue to find the correct path forward as a committee. So I appreciate all of your time, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Howerton.
Thank you. I just want to thank the GMDs that testified today, and I want to point out the one that's missing, which is GMD 3. They did submit written, but they were not willing to stand for questions, and I think that speaks very highly to their stance. And I want to point out a couple of things in their observations and concerns of Hamilton County that's in there. Their first response says, we can find no published information on DWR procedures from which to evaluate any alleged conflicts. So because that states to me that because there are no published information, then they don't know how to resolve conflicts. And I think that's a problem. And then they say in their second response, there is no rule conflict as a regulation does not prohibit consideration of any more information, local information, and analysis to further implement water right change law and other laws and the managed program. And they go on. Several concerning things in their response. I don't know that we can move this bill forward, but maybe we need a bill that dissolves GMD 3. And I hate to blow it up, but I am irritated beyond measure that communication cannot happen on a representative board, and that conflict management, if it's not written and stated, does not happen, is not acceptable. And so maybe that's something that we need to consider, just dissolve GMD 3 so that these other boards that are doing good work are not affected.
I do not intend to go to emergency final action on this bill. At this time, we've had our hearing. Representative Axix and Bloom, thank you for enduring with us. I realize you have another committee here at 10 o'clock a few minutes ago. 5 of you? Okay. Committee, I have tried very hard to keep this group and the coalition and people moving forward in a similar direction. We talked several weeks ago about keeping everybody in the boat, I guess. That doesn't mean that within a family there aren't a few sibling squabbles occasionally. And those we need to continue to deal with and keep moving the issue of water forward. I want to thank all the GMDs and Lane and everyone else who's provided testimony today. Committee, we have 3 bills that have advanced to the potentially to the House floor: 2633, 2634, and 2678. Today is our last committee meeting for a little while. Hopefully we can move those 3 bills out. I think those are 3 good quality bills, and I applaud this committee for your work on those. And those are things that are good and positive, and we're moving forward. Any other comments here? We've got just a little time, just for the information of the committee. I'd ask Lane to come forward. All the time we're working behind the scenes, yes, sir, on little things like water meters. You might kind of describe our project over the last week and a half or 2.
So it's been probably about, the state, we require meters on every active point of diversion. So everything is metered for the most part. Okay. Is that better? Is that? Okay, thank you. So everything's metered, and so we've got different meters for different installations, and there's a NetFM meter that is a very effective meter, but it's a battery-operated meter with a 10-year battery life. And now it was about 10, 11, 12 years ago, those were installed, so now all of a sudden the batteries are starting to run down. And so Chairman Minix had contacted me because they had contacted the NetFM dealer, basically, and they just said, you've got to replace the meter. Well, it's $1,800 per meter. So we looked at that and we were like, well, let's just have them change the battery. Have what's called certified service provider, CSP. If they have the credentials then from the meter company, the Division of Water Resources is absolutely fine with somebody like that changing the meter or changing the battery. And so what I found out this morning, instead of $1,800 per meter, then it'll be $250 per meter, which still seems quite a bit for a battery, but that's a lot better than $1,800.
I was just trying to point out some of the good things that Division of Water Resources and GMDs and everybody work together on in the background of things. That's a lot of money savings to producers out there. I don't know how many. I had 2 myself, and I called the local dealer, and he had 4 or 5 people calling in asking, what do we do now? So I appreciate your efforts in accomplishing that. Thank you.
Well, one other thing I'd like to touch on. I know that when Earl, the chief engineer, was here, there was some questions about domestic use and establishing a domestic water right. And we actually put together a white paper on that, and we provided that to the committee on what we're going to look for and try to make that process easier for folks then to establish their domestic water right and get their place in line.
Committee, I believe every testimony and everything we've done this year is out there on the S drive, isn't it, Tony? So if you have any questions or want to go back and review something, everything's there on your computer. Tony's done a very good job of keeping everything together, and I appreciate him. Chris and all our legislative research and technical help. The sound system in here, and occasionally when we have an overflow into the other room, gets to be a challenge also. We will meet again here in a week or 2 after we get past turnaround. We've got 1 bill coming over from the Senate that I'm aware of. We're going to send them 3. I'm sure we'll have a few further presentations and delve in some other issues and to talk about. But I want to thank the committee for your hard work this year. Thank you very much. Anything else? We are adjourned.